Welcome back, everybody, to We Are TPM with myself, Kyle Teixeira, sitting here again with John Teixeira. We are back this week to discuss what's a healthy vacancy rate. If you guys want to figure out what your vacancy rate is or discuss anything involving anything we discuss or want to discuss otherwise, give us a call, 817-818-9039, or shoot us an email at showmethemoney@wearetpm.com. Let's get into it. What is a healthy vacancy rate? And this can apply, high level, this applies to the market first, right?
Well, yeah, there's each market is going to be a little different, right? There's U.S. numbers, there's state numbers, there's going to be numbers to your region and your community. But I think we thought that this might be a good topic to go over because people with portfolios, let's call it 10 plus units, right? Maybe they have some multifamily. They're going to be more, this is a number that they should be concerned about all the time, that they should always be paying attention to. And they're the ones that are really going to see the fluctuation in vacancy rate and how it affects their microeconomy, right?
Mm-hmm.
When over the course of the last, few years, we've had, economic, let's call them anomalies, happen that have made the vacancy rates go way down or way up for a small period of time. It's just kind of been bouncing all over the place. So it's really good to know where you are in that market right now.
We also got to know what a vacancy rate is. So you should start there.
Okay.
That vacancy rate is, I guess, the percentage rate of how many things are vacant.
The percentage of your portfolio that is vacant.
Or the
at any one given time.
The percentage of the market that's vacant at any given time.
There you go.
On a single property, it'd be the percent of the year, I guess, that it's...
Well, you wouldn't do it on a single property, not the way we're doing it now. That's what I mean. That's exactly what I'm getting at is if you own one or two properties, you really have no idea what the vacancy rate. It becomes vacant every once in a while. You deal with it. You go. That doesn't have a vacancy rate, right? There's no indication to you whether you have a problem or not.
Well, let's see. What is a healthy vacancy rate? So we typically, in a balanced rental market, the range, you really have a range there of 5% to 8%.
Yep.
So why would we want any vacancy? Or what's the difference between 5 and 8%?
Well, you don't want there to too low of a vacancy. So you want to go through that? You want to go what the difference is, what the problems are with both? So if we have a rate that's too low, so let's say
below
5%, then you don't have enough supply. Rents are going to go up to a point of unaffordability, right? And you will later have to deal with that when now you have an oversupply and you are now on the other side of that spectrum.
Yeah. And most markets, when they get out of range, then you get volatility. You get,
right.
In order to correct too far in one direction, you generally go too far in the other direction. Well, you don't have to. That's just kind of what happens. So much like the sales market where you have buyer and seller markets, and in the rental market, we have a landlord's market, which is what you just described, which there's low supply and higher rents.
Right.
And then you have a tenant's market. When you get over that 8% and the 8 to 10% range or even more, where you have an oversupply of vacant properties and rent concessions become more common. So everybody's competing to get a tenant at that point. So things like concessions or incentives become more common, which essentially lowers rent. Even if rent prices on the top line don't come down directly, once concessions start coming in, say you get a month free or you get half a month free, well, you annualize that is a lower rent amount.
Yeah, whether it's a move-in cost or whether it's a monthly rent concession, it's still a concession that comes out of the landlord's pocket or the investor's pocket. And what does this do to investors, right? So investors obviously love low vacancy rates, right? But most of them don't think about the pendulum swing that's going to come back. And then so what you and I get to see is, okay, it's great when things are that way because rents are going up. You get to choose between lots of great tenants. So you get to make a great choice in your screening process because instead of having one or two applications, you have 5 or 10, right? So for us, that's a great scenario. The problem is, just like any pendulum, when it swings up this way so much, it's going to go back the other way. And then our investors freak out. And most investors don't understand that we need to be right in that healthy range so that tenants aren't freaking out, landlords aren't freaking out, everybody's happy in that 5 to 8% range.
Yeah, because what happens when, like you said, it's you can get all these tenants and get people in because of low supply and rents are going up. Well, what else happens? The back end effect of that, of your current tenants when renewals come due, when rents are going up on people who are living in homes, and then they start moving once it gets bad enough, and that can happen quickly, especially in a market like the rental market that goes through strong swing seasonal trends already. So if a big market swing comes during a seasonal trend like the end of school where a lot of people move, then it can have a detrimental effect. If everyone's rent went up way too high and now everybody moves all at once, you can have a high demand and a quick change in supply.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
So let's look at our local market. So because we work here, we come and talk about.
Yeah. Also, what else is different before we get into the local market?
Okay.
So if you live in an apartment, right? Or if you're managing an apartment or you own an apartment, you're thinking about doing that, what is a healthy rate for that? Right? Because those apartments, especially those large apartments, they have all their numbers down to a science.
Yeah.
Like they know exactly what they're doing. They've got systems in place for everything. And their vacancy rate is extremely important to them. They probably look at it daily, right? And make adjustments daily. And apartments are usually a little higher. People are moving in and out of apartments faster. They don't stay as long. So their turnover rate or their vacancy rate, I would imagine, is a little bit higher. What is it?
It is higher. And, you're asking in the local market now? Or you just
well, I don't care. We started with the U.S. market. What is it in the U.S. market?
I do want to mention that the oversupply in apartments can have an effect on the rental market, trickling down to the single family market and everything else. So it even if you're not in multifamily investing, it can have a big effect on your portfolio, even if it doesn't involve multifamily.
Well, to your point, it also has the opposite effect too. How many times have we heard, "Oh man, I'm going to go get a house. You got a house for sale for rent. I'm going to go get a house because for this $1,800, I can barely get a 2-bedroom apartment for $1,800. Now I can go get a house and a yard and everything." And you know what I mean? How many times have we heard that also?
Yeah. I mean, it's not just rent, right? It's expenses and expenses. Yep. There's going to be a significant difference in expenses on single family to a managed,
pest control,
a whole bunch of stuff.
Landscaping. Yep.
So, and I'm sure we're going to get into we're going to get into the local market, and that will definitely involve the oversupply of apartments. So in North Texas, as of Q2 2025, so immediately now, the metro vacancy rate is 7.1. So in DFW, which is actually, the top end of that range, I guess. Mm-hmm. Still middle, but single family rentals, they're at 5.5. So it's actually, while that sounds healthy, you actually want the single family range to be a little bit lower. So
you're in that healthy range, though.
Yeah. I mean, so apartments are 8.9%. 8.9%
on apartments. And
that's high.
And that doesn't surprise me because you and I have been seeing apartments going up everywhere in all cities, not just certain cities, but almost all the cities that in DFW. It seems like apartment complexes are just popping up everywhere. The unfortunate thing for developers of apartment complexes is it takes so long to go from idea to implementation to I'm actually renting, that the market changes horrendously in that period of time. So if it takes you 4 to 5 years before, you say, okay, I'm going to build this 900 unit apartment complex over here, and I got to go get a business plan together. I got to get financing together. I got to go get it approved with the city council, and now I got to put permits together, and then building it, and then all of that takes so long.
Why once it starts, those apartment buildings go up so quick. It's because they've ran the numbers based on
they do
something
go up quick once they start, don't they?
Once they break ground, they go up quick.
But the market that they had the idea in, or business they set the business plan in, is now completely different than the market that they're renting in.
Yeah, and you have hyperlocal markets. The thing about big apartment complexes is, as hyperlocal as you can get, they create an oversupply on themselves. They're literally introducing to the market a bulk amount of empty units, and that's why you see
all at one time.
Yeah, they're new introduction to the market, vacant units, and that's why you see them actually incrementally, as they build them, rent them out for cheaper rent rates, because they're in an oversupplied market. And then people always get surprised that that introductory rate, once the complex is complete, goes up to the market rent. And it's there's a lot of reasons. The oversupply in that direct market has been solved because they filled all the vacancies. All the amenities are done. What you're actually paying for has all been completed, because there's a higher value to living not in a construction area.
As a property manager, I'm still always amazed on how quickly and how easily these new apartment complexes, they go up and they rent out and fill up, like in almost overnight. It seems like they fill up, people move in.
Because what I just described, it's the cheap incentive rents.
It's wild, and that has a direct impact on the single family resident investors every time a new complex goes up in their area, right?
Yeah, especially in your local market,
right?
So let's go over some factors that are affecting our vacancy locally. So we have population growth. So Texas is still leading the U.S. in migration. So we're in Mansfield, Arlington, right smack in the middle of the two biggest cities, Fort Worth and Dallas. So actually, I don't know if Fort Worth would be number 2, but they're both up there in the top 5 of the state, right? So a lot of the population's migrating to this area. Rent increases. We talked about a lot. Rents have increased from 2021 to 2022. Was a massive increase across the market. So those effects are still being felt in 2025. So there's still it's definitely slowed. The data currently shows 2 to 3% year-over-year increase in 2025. So that's significantly less than what you saw in 21 and 22.
It is, and that correlates with what I see when we do our renewals.
New inventory. So there's a record number of new apartment units delivered in DFW from 2023 to 2024, which creates a temporary oversupply, like we were just talking about. And while we were talking about it in a hyper-local manner, the entire Metroplex has been flooded with new apartment buildings. So this has been a direct market thing too. And of course, higher interest rates. The would-be buyers have become renters until rates go down, which does help the single-family residential, because the would-be buyers generally go rent single-family.
Although, to your point, they came back down into the 6s, and that has stimulated a little bit more sales in the market that maybe is actually taking away from some of those. So, you know what? The point of this is to understand all the factors and to understand what your vacancy rate is. What would you say to the investor that has, I don't know, let's keep it a round number. They have 30 homes, right? I got 30 homes. My property manager's managing them. I don't think too much about it, but how many vacancies you got at any one time, right? Because that's a larger expense than you normally have when you have a turnover. Sometimes it is. So if I got 30 homes, what you want? Two vacancies at any one time at the most, right?
Yeah.
And if you have more than that, if you have a little bit more than that, that can be an anomaly. That's fine. But if you have 5 or 6, now we have a problem. So what is the problem? Is the problem market conditions? Probably. Is it the way it's being managed? Maybe.
Possible.
So you got to
Is it
look
bad
at
timing. Possibly.
Yeah, it could be a bunch of things.
Yeah.
But it's important to know what it is and what it should be. And nowadays, we could Google what the current vacancy rate is immediately, right? I can Google what's the current vacancy rate in Mansfield and get an answer from AI. I don't know how accurate it is, but if I'm an investor with several properties, what does it matter if it's 1 or 2% off, right? The point is, it says that Mansfield's at 7.1%, and I've got 7% of my portfolio vacant, then I know that I'm right on track, and I don't need to freak out about, oh my gosh, why is it so high, right? It's not high compared to everyone else.
Yeah, and I mean, when especially when they combine, like I said earlier, the times of year, so like the end of May. Yeah, it's listening.
My
to
AI
us.
is listening to us right
I don't
now.
know what
that is weird.
Word you triggered because I didn't hear you say.
I didn't say anything, but she is listening to us. That is great right there. Well, that's a good explanation of how easy it is to get your vacancy rate, apparently.
Yeah, so and like I'm saying, so you have a lot of leases that end in May, for example, in your portfolio. A lot of people like that because there is an increase, generally a short-term, like month-over-month increase in rents a lot of times come summer months in June and July. And you might ask everything we just talked about why that would be. Like, doesn't that create an oversupply? Well, you got to think of the
there's usually more demand also.
The fundamentals of how that works. If you have tenants moving out, they need to find a new place before they move out. So it creates a higher demand prior to introducing that supply. And that's why this market works a little bit differently. So then you have that. So which is to say that if you have a higher vacancy rate during a higher rents time period, you can roll over rents, and it can be an advantageous thing.
Yep.
So, but
having said that, I'm not a huge fan of trying to artificially.
Not artificially, no, but if it happens.
Well, trying to deliberately, I should say.
Yeah.
Create a time on your lease when it's going to end, because the bottom line is that you don't know when a tenant's going to leave. When a lease ends is irrelevant. When a tenant actually leaves is what is important, and you don't know when that's going to be. For instance, probably the worst month of the year to have a vacancy is October. So let's say that I have a lease ending in September 30th. Well, if I have a lease ending in September 30th, I'm going to try to get them to renew, right? They'll either renew or they won't. If they don't, then it's going to go month to month. If it goes month to month, then they're going to stay there for 1, 2, 3, 9, 12. I've had people stay month to month for years. How do I know when they're actually going to leave?
Well, that's all a strategic balance, because I have seen people who have the policy that they don't allow you to go month to month. So you either sign a new lease or you leave. And there's a lot of apartment complexes that do that. I think it's a negative, right? It's a way of forcing your tenant out.
I think that's a dumb business model.
Well, it's common, but it's for what you just said. It's so that they don't have renewals in October. They're making sure they're doing that trade-off of making sure that they know when the tenant's going to move out. So there's definitely negatives to that, though, like vacancy. You will have a higher vacancy rate if you have that policy. I'll almost assure
you're going to stress people out and force them to make a decision, then they're just going to leave. I mean, I would. If
people love commitment these days.
Yeah, right.
So what's the ideal vacancy targets by property type? So we talked about the market. The ones we have by property type are Class A apartments, 6 to 8%, Class B and C apartments, 5 to 7%. Those are sweet spots to balance the turnover with the cash flow, like we just said. Single family is actually lower at 3 to 5%. So,
okay,
that's why we're at the higher end of all those, but not in dangerous territory. The other one is short-term rentals, which we talk about a lot. Haven't talked about it all today. Depends on it, because these are so heavily seasonally dependent and days of the week dependent. Average vacancy rate for short-term rentals is like 30%. So, property type does matter.
Actually, when I do the comps on short-term rentals, when we add a new one, it seems like 30% is a pretty good rate. Like the numbers I see most people getting are a lot lower than that.
Well, I would have to break.
A lot higher,
I
I
would
should
then
say.
have to break the short-term rentals into property type also,
Right.
because you're going to see a lower vacancy rate on, for example, apartment short-term rentals that serve a purpose, a higher purpose during the week, or like for business travel, stuff like that, where 5-bedroom homes are going to see a higher vacancy rate than like 1-bedroom apartments. It's just because of the fundamentals of how they are, but you're going to see higher revenues on the, in turn. So, so what are some strategies to maintain a healthy rate? Pre-leasing, right?
Okay.
So you have you get notice from the tenant. Most places require at least 30-day notice from a tenant. That is for that reason, mainly to make sure they can market to a new tenant and have somebody prepared to come in after the other one leaves. Where if you didn't do that until the day they left, you would likely have a longer vacancy period, which would increase vacancy rates.
Yep. We do that.
Minimizing the turnover gap. Yep. We've talked a lot about that, holding costs and everything. You being dynamic with your pricing. So do you want to be ahead of the market or not?
I like to call it not being stubborn, right? Listening to the market. Listen to the market. You put your home out there at a certain price because you think that's the price that it should be at, and the market says no because no one goes to look at it, or they don't bring applications. So the market's telling you everything you need to know. Like, you want to sit there and be stubborn at that price and not be, you called it dynamic, but not be versatile, right?
Yeah.
Then your vacancy rate is going to be higher. You're going to be on the market longer.
You respond to supply and demand changes, right?
That's right.
Another one is retention incentives. So to keep tenants, like we said, don't push them out. We used that example earlier, but maybe even renewal discounts. So say they like that new apartment we talked about because they're a good tenant, they stayed. Instead the rent, you renting it at $800 for something that's worth $1,000, maybe you renew them at $900 instead of, that way they're not seeing comparable units for the same price you're offering them in their market.
That's right.
So
absolutely.
And really just any flexible lease terms that you want to offer can help too. Like you said, not requiring you to renew or you're going month to month. So what would be some signs of trouble? Red flags or sirens going off in the market or in your portfolio?
You mean regarding vacancy rate or external factors causing the vacancy rate to be low or high? I'm trying to understand your question.
Factors. So I guess vacancy rate. When do we get worried?
As an investor, we get worried when it gets, much more over 7%, 8%.
Yeah.
Right? If it's 10%.
When we're using percentages, so a vacancy rate, a primary factor of vacancy rate is time. In order to look at a vacancy rate, you have to determine what time frame you are looking at.
So it's a good point. So, go ahead. Sorry.
So how long does a vacancy rate prolong is where you get your warning sirens. Like you said, you could have a really high vacancy rate for short period of time and it turns over in a week. Like there could be a week where you have an extremely high vacancy rate. So what's your vacancy rate over a 60-day period? That's where.
Well, I think the point you're making is comes down to operationally, right? We didn't talk about that too much, but operationally as a landlord or a property manager, what you're doing will have an impact on that vacancy rate, right? So if it takes you, I don't know, if it takes you 3 to 5 days to turn a property, that's pretty fast, and your vacancy rate should stay down, right? And now it's only market conditions that are affecting it and or price. If it takes you 2 months to get a home ready to market, your vacancy rate naturally is going to go higher and higher because, as you pointed out just now, you're going to have other properties that are going to be coming on the market while you're messing with that one. And now you got to go back and get that one. And like, if you don't have enough people to deal with it and you don't have the resources to do them quickly, that's a problem. That's an operational problem that will absolutely drastically affect your vacancy rate.
Yeah. And then you have just the market conditions, mispricing or location. That's a more rare one. Everybody wishes it doesn't happen, but location can change. Say you have a Ford plant or something, in your next year rental, and they close the plant, or they close a big business with a lot of local workers like that right in your area. Well, likely all of them are going to move, right? Or maybe not move, but you're going to get an oversupply. You're going to get a hyper local supply or vacancy issue. So. And you're going to hope that and maybe if you see that and you're not renting to someone who was in that was affected by that, you acknowledge that in your renewal, or you acknowledge that in how you move forward. So,
well, that comes down to you asked a good question. What do you do, or how do you mitigate it up front? That comes down to paying attention to your market, right? Understanding what's happening in your community, your micro community, especially around your rentals, right? And knowing your market.
That is true. And so what if you're getting like what if a lot of people are looking at it and you're not getting any applications? So
okay.
if you were looking at
are
it,
you getting
the pricing
feedback?
Might be fine.
Hopefully you're getting feedback. Hopefully you have some system for getting feedback from these people. Because if you don't, then you're really at it doing yourself a disservice, because now you got a whole bunch of people looking at it and you have no idea why they're not applying. So that's problem number one.
It's likely a condition thing or some other factor. Mispricing.
It usually is.
Right price, something.
Or hey, I came here and looked at it because it's really nice. The pictures looked amazing. I couldn't wait to see it, but I just couldn't get myself to pay that price because there's another one down the street that's not quite as nice, but it's like $400 cheaper a month, and I like my $400 a month better than I like the nice stone counters. So, that's both of those things can happen. So you gotta get the condition right. You gotta get the price right. Just we say that all the time, but that's just reality.
Love it. All right. Well, if anybody has some sirens going off, got red flags, you got your percentages going amiss, give us a call, 817-818-9039. Shoot us an email at showmethemoney@wearetpm.com. John and Kyle are out.
We go.